everybody. Welcome back to Operation Tomatometer. This is a special episode which we have an exclusive interview with one of the filmmakers of the documentary we just reviewed, Youth Governor. So Matthew, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Matthew Halmy. I'm one half of a director team with my brother, Jaron Halmy, and we're the co-directors of the Youth Governor.
I'll start with my questions then. How is it working with Blumhouse Television? We know Blumhouse for their extensive and very impressive experience in horror, but how did this project unfold within the company?
Yeah, so it's a personal relationship, well, not personal, professional relationship. A long time ago, Jaron, my brother, he's a editor and also a director, co-director with me together. He worked for a producer, Amanda Spain. She's an executive producer on the doc. They worked together many years ago, and when we were like sharing people what we were up to, early work in progress stuff, we sent it to Amanda, and we had no idea where she was, but you know, she's a strong professional connection of ours, and she was like, oh, I'm at Blumhouse now, this is really interesting, I'm going to put this in our weekly like recap, and it really kind of started moving along from there. But yeah, Blumhouse obviously is really known for the horror genre, but behind the scenes, they really support and invest in a lot of independent films, docs, things like that, that are well outside of their genre. I think their most well-known version of that is the movie Whiplash, which was like a sensational film. Blumhouse really got that on its feet and got that going. But you know, they do these things a little more quietly, but they're promoting our doc and other things like it a little more these days.
I didn't know that. Thank you. Were the interview and like the scenes showing like each candidate's backstory, were they shot before or after or during the documentary?
Yeah, great question. So we're really proud of how the film came together. It's almost, the film is almost, the production and the story is almost edited in time. We didn't go back to our candidates really and do interviews after the fact. We didn't do sit down master interviews where we recapped everything and then spliced in sound bites. I think you'll notice that, you know, the film is, we're really proud it's a verite doc. You are very much always in the story. You never break away, go to say some nondescript location with your subject sitting in a chair, and then they're talking about what they did, what they're doing, or what they're gonna do. There's nothing wrong with that format, but we liked, you know, a very pure form. And also we wanted to keep the hand of the filmmaker very, invisible, and let these young people just go through this experience. And we wanted to document it in a very pure sense. So we didn't really, the scene with Piper at her home, that was very much in time. That was before Sacramento. She hadn't gone to Sacramento to like take that next step. She had been whittled down to top 3, and all that stuff is in time. So we didn't like go back knowing, you know, future stuff and you know, a more hands-on approach as a documentary. We didn't do that.
Yeah, that was definitely like very visible to us in the documentary, how everything, yeah, you're so right. I was never taken out of the story. We were constantly, but I didn't know that. That must have been difficult, right?
It is difficult. I think, you know, the best documentaries are very much rooted in journalistic instinct and intent. And as you guys all know, with your work at your paper, this notion of being out in front of a story, right? So like kind of understanding where you are in the arc of this journalistic investigation and where it's going. And documentary is even more difficult because not only do you have to, you know, you have to be out in front of the story, and get lucky, but you have to be out in front of the story with cameras ready to film the thing that you do not yet know will happen, right? And so it's extremely difficult. But you know, my brother and I were a part of Youth in Government as young people, and we were also like adult advisors, kind of counselors in the program for a long time. In addition to like our career in documentaries is like a philanthropy, but we've seen so many youth governor races in our life that we really know what's about to happen next. Even some of the candidates, when they, you know, in the beginning of the film, when they have that youth governors kind of meeting and they're like, you know, setting up that everyone's going to run. We were looking at some of them where we were like Bio Collins, like I saw him. It's just his character, his demeanor. I was like, this guy's making it to top 6, I guarantee it. I just knew, and so those are those bets that you have to make as a journalist, like what story you can follow. You can't follow 35 young people at once, so yeah, so I think that being out in front of the story and knowing where we needed to be and knowing where the story was going allowed us to really be free of control. We knew where it was going to go. We just knew we needed to be there. And that's really a true blessing in doc film, when you really just kind of know where it's going, as opposed to just running wild trying to like follow someone's life, right? That's very hard. So.
Thank you. I did look at your previous works on Vice, World of Sports, and I looked at the description. I didn't watch it, sorry, but
Okay.
it did say something about like the politics of sports. So were there any like apparent similarities or differences between working on that and this doc?
Definitely differences. I think that the best comparison to make between our work at Vice and this film is that Vice was it's a very intense, hardcore field work. So I was the field producer for that series. So I was developing our stories, working with, other journalists, and then going into the field, so I did stories in North Africa, in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, a lot of pretty tense environments, and sports is really passionate and intense, and, politics and culture play out in sports, even more so in other countries. So I wouldn't say there are a lot of comparisons to like the story retold. I think it was more so that after Vice, I was so fried from international work that I wanted to do something personal and just more tender and touching, as opposed to something just really intense and gritty, and like, look at how chaotic the world is. I think there's some the youth governor is really it's a story about campaigns, a story about candidacy, and then it's also ultimately it's a story about these young people and their personal journey. So it's intimate, and I think that that's something we always strived for at Vice, was to tell these kind of bigger, insane stories through like singular characters and intimate stories. So I think we learned a lot about that, how hard it is. But we think it shows well in the doc that you really, for your first question about the sit down interviews, like we also did a lot of audio only interviews where there was no cameras. And so there's these moments, like, for example, when Aiden Blaine is at track and he's running track, and then we see him in his car and he's driving, and you just hear him ruminating and talking about what he's feeling. So those interviews are done without cameras, and it just, any interview without a camera is going to be more intimate, more honest. And so we were able to draw out just a more personal introspection from the candidates, as opposed to like putting them on the camera all the time. Or the classic like docu-series reality TV thing is like, you put them in a room with someone else and you're like, okay, talk about what you're doing, and have them like talk to each other, which our opinion never like plays out emotionally the way you want it, because people are like on camera, they're like, so how is it running for youth governor? And they're like, it's really hard. It just doesn't, it's forced, it's forced. So, but yeah, the audio interview thing, keep that in mind if you guys ever want to do stuff. The audio only, no cameras. It's great. It's great.
Thanks so much for the tip.
It's definitely very the authenticity in like the interviews. I was wondering how you guys like got that. Thank you.
Yeah, so Angeline touched upon some really good topics, and you touched upon your own participation as a counselor in the program. And so naturally, now I'm wondering, like, how did you and your brother, Jaron, right? Yeah. Yes, Jaron, first decide to partake in the Youth Governor program, and why were you particularly drawn to tell the story of these teens?
Yeah, we were drawn to it just because it was just a popular program in our hometown. The California Youth in Government has like a really strong history, strong culture. It's super fun. We told a little more serious of a story, but when you're participating it's very social. You just get to meet people from all over the state. You make a lot of great friends. I got my first girlfriend out of Youth in Government, so that was like a big plus. You get people and just kind of step into that like other version of yourself, especially if you're like running for stuff. Like we showed the youth governor race, but there's, you know, people running for Secretary of State, you know, Secretary of the Senate, Lieutenant Governor, Sergeant at Arms, there's committee chairs, there's lobbyists. Like you can step up in all these different ways, you know. So it's a youth development program. So it's a way for you to like kind of step up. And there's a second part to that question. What was it? Why did we, or can you repeat
Why
that?
were you particularly drawn to tell like the story of these teenagers?
Yeah. I think what you see in the doc so well is that the young people who participate in youth government, they fully lose themselves in this experience. They are so committed to this simulation. You know, it's really just, that's what it is, and they forget. And so it's so immersive, and thus the experience is so authentic that to just point the cameras at it and really try to have no effect on what we're seeing is in of itself this rich and compelling story. I mean, this doc is really just that. You know, obviously our editing and the music, the emotions that we draw out of the moments that's us, that's our filmmakership. But I mean, they really are committed to it, and it's also just an incredible program. It's so rich and detailed. It's so robust, the experience. They're learning the hard work of self-government, like the detailed work. It's not like a little weekend retreat thing. It's many months. And I always like this anecdote of like, you know, we'll be in Sacramento, it'll be like day 3, everyone's just grinding, running this government. And there'll be like a small committee room deep in the well of the California Capitol. There'll be a small committee room, and there'll be like some 15-year-old like standing outside the committee room, like all stressed out, like, oh man, like I got to get these amendments. I got to get these amendments in for this bill. Like, you know, we got to get it onto the floor of the Senate, and then we got to get it to the other side, like right away. And then like, I got opponents. And he like has completely forgotten that he has school next week, that there's tests, that he's not a senator from, representing his district, and there is no committee, and he doesn't have to worry about it. Like they totally lose themselves in this detailed hard work. And you know, we started making this film many years ago, but it's a timeless story. And I think you guys would agree that this passion for self-government is an important thing to showcase for young people, and for adults even more so, you know. And so that is something that we're always been taken with. And then as filmmakers, it's like, we're like, if we're not going to make this story, then what are we even doing with our careers in documentary film? Like, this is just incredible, and it's like personal, and we just have to do it, you know. And it took us over 10 years to really finally like do it, you know.
Wow, that's like really, that's insane. That's very insightful to understand your perspective coming from all that experience in nearly 10 years. That's insane. But we really love viewing all the different candidate stories. However, we were wondering about one specific candidate, Solomon. It's become kind of a joke. Like, what happened to him? We would have loved for him to have more screen time.
Yeah, same. There's a saying in film. It's kind of well, maybe I won't say it. Maybe it's basically you have to make a lot of hard choices. You know, this film you really have to get a film like this to 90 minutes or less. And, you know, you really have to tell a tight story. Ultimately, these docs this is the entertainment industry, you know, and for our doc to succeed and make it to where it is now, you know, there's a lot of executive types. There's a lot of bureaucracy. I mean, we've spent 4 years trying to get to this level, you know, so there's a lot of hard choices. And this is an ensemble cast. There's 6 main characters, right? We can't tell. Early versions of the film, we were at over 2 hours, like 2 hours and 15 minutes, because we were going into the hometowns and dedicating personal storylines to everybody. But we just couldn't, you know. And Solomon, He had great energy early in the film. I mean, early in his candidacy, he was an important like leader in the field, and he didn't make it to the top three. And then we kind of just had to like let that story go. I mean, think about in real politics, when people lose their primaries, you don't really hear from them anymore. You focus on the people who made it to the next level. But we're in touch with all six. Good, we're still friends to this day. We call them kids, but they're all turning 21 this year. They're adults now.
Wow.
So we count them all as friends.
Wow, that's okay. That makes a lot more sense. I completely hear you there. I do film myself. I know what it's like going through dailies and looking through all that footage, but
Yeah, you got to make some tough choices.
Yeah, some tough choices. And I guess now we're kind of bridging towards kind of like our message here. We on the podcast, we've thrown out multiple thoughts towards the intent of the documentary, like who is it geared towards? Is it more geared towards teenagers to like inspire them to get involved in politics and fight for issues? Or would you also say it's more for adults to realize the capability of teenagers and their capabilities in contributing to government? Like, what do you think?
We like to let the doc speak for itself and not try to like tell people what they should feel. I think that your co-host from the YouTube video, she's not here today, but I'm blanking on her name. I'm so sorry, but she had a lot of great takes on it, and I think that one thing that you guys brought up, a question you brought up last time in that YouTube video, is like, do you think this documentary is trying to humanize politicians? Which I thought was a really interesting like thing to say. Like, I think it shows where we're at with politicians to even ask, like, is this trying to humanize them, as if to say that they have become something twisted that requires humanizing, which maybe is true in some sense. But I think that, so I'll just answer it a little more simply. I think our goal for young people is to see their peers taking something that's very important, taking it seriously, and doing it with like style and personal like approach, and doing it their way. It doesn't feel contrived what they're doing. It feels very honest and very authentic. And we think that above all else, honesty and authenticity are really important for young people connecting with something. And then for like older folks, adults, we think that everything that they say, that's what, when adults ask me that same question, I said, listen to the words that they say in this doc, the things that they say. It is so truthful, and so it just cuts, and it is so important for the things that we're dealing with right now. Like I really like to reference the storyline of Ethan Clark and Piper Samuels. There's this moment after, you guys have all seen the film, right? I'm not spoiling. Okay. After Ethan kind of like suffocates out this alt-right, thing that emerges, obviously in the ways that some current political leaders did not suffocate out such things. When he does that, and he like presents Piper with what he did, and all that happens. I mean, these are two young people who in real life are very politically opposite, very different opinions. But what does she say about him in that moment? What does she say? She says, so I really admired like his passion and commitment to his ideas. And I really appreciated and respected that. And he was very kind to me. Think about those three things: the respectfulness, kindness, and admiration, sitting in the middle of a relationship between two opposite political, participants. Adults should listen to those words, and the film is littered with moments. I could go, I could go on and on. Like, Piper says, like, people think candidates are so, you ask a humanized politicians, Piper says, everyone thinks these candidates are so powerful and everyone knows who they are, but deep down inside, running for office is an incredibly vulnerable thing, because you're leaving your fate into the hands of a bunch of people you don't know. Think about how intense that is for the politician, someone who's running, a regular person trying to, serve. So these are the things that we want adults to like truly hear these words, because they're so truthful. So I think that's our biggest goal, is for people to just listen to what they say.
thank you for that. That was like really comprehensive, and I really like that, the whole humanization
Yeah,
and
totally.
us talking about.
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
I really like that you brought up the Piper storyline, because when I watched that part, I was just like, wow, this like it really changed the way I thought of like bipartisan politics and like the two parties and how they interact with each other. And like I realized like how deeply politics is segregated with those two parties. So I thought that was really interesting. But more geared towards like the more teen aspect of the documentary. I really liked like the use of social media throughout the film and like how that's integrated into the program. Like why was that an aspect that you wanted to include and like felt would be good to highlight in the documentary?
Yeah, so this program they have, Yodel, it's called. It's actually not a part of the program. It's like imagine like a geolocated Twitter. So like imagine if your guys' high school had Yodel, it would be like in a 1 mile radius, this social media network can exist amongst the people within that geographic region. So the kids set up, there was like they had a different version of it, and all this stuff was happening. And then like the adult leadership are like, oh, we got to shut this down. Like we can't control this. And so they called the company and had them like geofence the Sacramento so that they couldn't do all this like tweet, like this, their own program anyway. And then the kids just found Yodel was like a different program. They like got it going up and running within like hours and had like a new program. But I guess to answer your question, I mean, social media it's like an inseparable part of political life. It's an inseparable part of how we as citizens engage with our political leadership and policy making and lawmaking and all that stuff. So, it's a no-brainer. I think that one question we get about that is like, why didn't we fixate even more on it? And I think, the question, the answer to that is that like we wanted to utilize Yodel and what happened with, our characters with Aiden, with Bio, with Piper through social media. We wanted to showcase its importance, but we didn't want to like drag the story through the troll, the mud or the trolls or whatever. It's like, is that the story? Like, oh, there's social media chatter about the candidates and like how did that affect them? It's like we have a light touch to it, but so much of our lives revolves around these interactions on social. And it was so cool that they had this like unique platform that no one's ever heard of before. So it was an interesting component. And then the on-screen stuff, just like a light touch, so it just rounds out the film and makes it feel more of an interesting experience.
Yeah, totally. And then our final question for this interview is, we're teens who are promoting this film. We did our episode on the youth governor. So, we think of, your documentary as an art form rather than just, a film. So we wanted to know what you thought personally about today's youth and like how they experience like media, like films, your own documentary and stuff like that. And like what you would want to contribute to that. Like, what else do you want teens to do besides just watching the film? Like what's your overall goal and perspective on that?
Yeah, wow, such a great question. I'm very hesitant to say, because I think that I'm a millennial. I think a lot of millennials are now like kind of in the driver's seat for creating things and making things, and we're all just, there's a lot of people, they're trying to speak for your generation. It's a common mistake. Older people trying to speak for younger people, like Euphoria is an incredible work of art, a masterful work of art, right? This is also a 38-year-old man trying to like present what Gen Z is doing and thinking, right? It's a bit presumptuous in a way. And so that's why we really just like to stick to the answer of like, we like the film to speak for itself, because they say it's their story, but it's our documentary, right? And so I think they say in essence, and we just support what they're saying. And I think what they say we would agree with, which is that people should think about being a part of something bigger than themselves. And then I think everyone should vote. Is the obvious, is an obvious answer. I mean, think of, the election with, down at the end of the story with Piper and Aiden, a lot of You see the roll call votes. There's a lot of people who are saying 100 votes for Piper Samuels, 50 votes for Ada Blaine, and 5 abstentions, 8 abstentions. You know, these are people that did not vote, right? You added up all those abstentions, maybe that vote would have gone differently. I think you guys know there's tons of examples of not voting really kind of like having an outcome exist that not everyone wants. So that's the easy answer, but it's also the very honest and truthful one.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew. You know, I want to thank you for this interview. We all appreciate you coming out and doing this interview with us. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we felt like this film really spoke to us as like our school community as well. We have an election simulation. We touched on it briefly in the podcast, but this was a really interesting experience and documentary to watch, especially because a lot of what we review is not directly like connected to things that we can relate to. And I felt like it was great that you reached out to us because we're a podcast and a publication that has a really dynamic team voice that like we're very happy to have representing your documentary.
Thank you guys so much. And I just want to add that New York has an excellent youth and government program, the state of New York. And I want to find a way to connect you to the youth governor of New York. He's like a huge supporter of this doc. So if nothing else, I think it would be cool for you all to know each other. But maybe some people from your school will be exposed to youth and government and can become the next youth governor. So
Hopefully.
Come down to the East Coast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much. And for everyone watching, this is the end of the episode.